Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to talk about should boards push for CEOs to take positions on sensitive social issues? And joining me is somebody that I had on the show before. Please welcome Adam Bryant, who's the managing director for Merryck and Company. He's also the former longtime New York Times columnist of a popular column titled The Corner Office, where throughout his career he interviewed over 500 CEOs. And finally, he's also an accomplished author, authoring books titled The Corner Office, Quick and Nimble, and he has a new book coming out in March that's published by the Harvard Business Review Press, which is titled The CEO Test. So, Adam, maybe we can just take a second and you could just give us a quick review of what we can expect on the CEO test. And I'm sure it's going to be available in March on Amazon.
Yes, well, great to see you again, TK. The book is called The CEO Test, and I'm writing it with Kevin Scher, who's the former longtime CEO of Amgen, the biotechnology company. Part of the backstory is that many people focus on how the job of the CEO is truly unique and what makes it different from every other job. We kind of turned the lens around and said, well, in what ways is it the same as the job for all leaders? And then we framed it as a test. What are the key challenges that make or break all leaders? And then what can we learn from CEOs about how to do all those core challenges well? So we have chapters on, really listening and making sure it's not just listening in the moment, but kind of creating a listening ecosystem and infrastructure in your company. And we talk about the inner game of leadership, not just what you need to do as a leader, but how you need to be as a leader. Strategy, transformation, building culture, driving high performance teams. Those are some of the areas we're going to be talking about in the book.
Well, I look forward to that. I've enjoyed your first two, and I'm sure the third one will be equally as interesting. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
So I invited you because this is not an easy topic to talk about. And I thought you would be good to be introspective on, offering some views on this. But basically, with the topic of should boards encourage CEOs to take public positions on more sensitive and or sometimes politically tied issues. And when I ask that question, I'm talking about things like social justice unrest, healthcare, Supreme Court composition, things that sort of have an edge to it.
Yeah.
And so what would be your position on this relative to boards and CEOs?
It's a great question, and it's such a timely question, TK. The one sentence answer is boards need to be proactive about this rather than reactive. I think it's good to remind ourselves just the context in this unique moment we're at in history. It does seem like all of society's problems are kind of rolling past the front doors of government and rolling up to the front doors of companies. And I think the pandemic has accelerated that trend because the traditional wall between the personal and professional has really come down. And so companies in many ways are playing this outsized role in society. At the same time, increasingly we're seeing that employees feel like they have a right to a vote in their companies. We're seeing that more and more people are saying we're not comfortable with who we're selling products to. At Hachette Publishing, a lot of the staff said, we're going to walk out if you publish Woody Allen's memoir, and they ultimately won. And we're just seeing that more and more, saying we want to have a say in our company's policies. So with that context, to answer your question specifically, companies cannot sort of set out to say, this is our opinion or stance on every single issue in society, right? Because then you're just going to, at some level, alienate all your employees. I think you have to have a stance on some of the big issues of the day. And we've seen dozens of companies, maybe hundreds of companies, come out with comments in the wake of the killing of George Floyd about, this is not going to be tolerated and it's not core to who they are. And I think it's that is right. You mentioned the example of fracking. I think, unless you're in the oil and energy industry, I think that's the kind of example that kind of issue where you say, look, we're not going to wade into every issue. But I think the way you get in front of this as a company, I've heard a couple of things from all the leaders that I've interviewed. One is to have a couple of issues that you are going to take a stand on and sort of say, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, this is why it is important to us. I interviewed Chip Berg, the head of Levi's, and their two issues are immigration and gun control. And they got involved in the gun control issue because there was a customer who carried a gun into one of their stores. It went off by accident, and nobody was hurt. But they said, look, this could have been one of our employees. So I think it's good to have like a couple of things, ideally that are tied to the narratives, the values, something that feels right about this is what we stand for as a company. I think the second piece of advice is that it is good to have a stance about some of these issues that employees are going to have a problem with. I think of an example like Google and Microsoft that do some work for the Pentagon. Both, I know with Satya Nadella, he has come out and said, we are going to do work for the Defense Department. If you are working on a team that does that and you're uncomfortable with that, then try and find another team within Microsoft. And if you're uncomfortable with us doing that as a company, then maybe this company isn't right for you. And I really like that, just sort of taking the proactive stance. This is who we are. We're not saying you have to like it, but if you don't like it, then there's lots of other companies you can work for. So those are some of the frameworks that I've heard that make a lot of sense to me.
So to your point, I've had the opportunity to talk to two Fortune 100 CEOs about this question. And first one said that they vetted these issues so heavily, so that they rarely took positions unless it was a real no-brainer kind of thing, like your comments on the George Floyd death. It was not difficult to say, this isn't right. Okay. But the other it was very interesting. Again, I'm going to guard the name, but they said that they had taken positions on topics of social issues in the past. And they found out that, as you had mentioned, that employees were either very upset, okay, or very happy, okay, with this. And that on some cases it accelerated to the point that it was harmful to the company. Okay, so they have pulled back and have taken the position that it's going to be rare that they take, that position, because they just can't please. There's such a array of views in their company that they just can't get on common ground very often that isn't offending somebody. So interesting. I mean, again, it's a very tough topic, very tough to make decisions on when you go and when you don't go. But, no one said that serving on the board or serving as a CEO is going to be easy.
Right. And, I like what you just said as kind of a talk track for a CEO. I mean, everybody's talking about how authenticity and humanity and humility are increasingly important in this day and age. And I think, I can imagine a CEO saying roughly what you just said, just kind of acknowledging, look, we're a company, we're a business, we have various stakeholders. And if we were to, we're not a government, we're not a
Right.
nation. I think it's important just to acknowledge if we took a stance on every single issue, we would wind up probably alienating every single employee in this company. And while we will focus on things that are core to who we are and that are important to our values, we also have to remember, that we are a business and we're here to accomplish a goal for our stakeholders. And I think that kind of framing will sort of help lower the temperature a little bit, and just remind people again, it is such a balancing act, and it is very easy to hit kind of wrong notes in this discussion. But I think just being thoughtful about those discussions, and even acknowledging the challenge of it goes a long way, because I think anybody would kind of nod their head at an all hands meeting and say, yeah, I get that.
Well, when I did my stint as president of the bank, everybody advised me to avoid talking about politics and religion. So I guess this sort of fits into that category of be careful where you're stepping. But
Yeah.
so let me ask you, let me turn this around just real quickly. What about the times where the CEO takes personal opinions, but takes them public, and it has a bad reflection back on the corporation because it's very difficult for the CEO to separate the two? What is the role of the board in that if reputationally it's hurting the company?
Yeah, I think somebody's got to say something to them, and whether it's during the broader board session, or the lead director, or the chairman, is a separate role, but somebody's got to have the conversation with them. I mean, every week you see a headline of where a CEO says something that I think they regret later once they see the backlash. There's a recent incident of a CEO talking about with Black executives that it's hard to find the talent, and that prompted an instant and
Right.
predictable backlash. And you'd like to think that somebody on the board took them aside and said, "Never say that again,"
Yeah.
and had those discussions, because it's another facet of this day and age we live in, that a single comment just can erupt on social media, whether it's from the CEO or another senior executive, or even a manager somewhere. Just have to be so careful.
Yeah. So we got about 90 seconds left, but I wanted to ask you one other thing before we part, and that is knowing that certain relevant social issues like diversity or the environment and sustainability are going to be part of companies' statements of corporate purpose, which has obviously been evolving and is a new sort of requirement and requested disclosure by companies. And also some of those are going to end up being part of executive comp, okay, because people will tie targets to that. So what advice would you offer on how boards and CEOs should sort of structure those conversations on what ends up being part of the business purpose statement?
Yeah. Well, I think diversity is the one that is coming up more and more, and a lot more boards are putting real teeth on the performance targets. And CEOs are no longer getting credit just for trying; they want to see same results just as much as they do. I think you can't. You have to only pick a couple of things, right? Because if you say we're going to measure the CEO, we're going to measure you on 100 things. Let's be honest, CEO jobs are really difficult.
Right.
But you've got to focus on a couple of things that are core to what the company has stated, what it needs to be accomplished, the real pain points and hot buttons. But the final comment will be that a lot of companies have had these conversations about what is our purpose, what is our stand, what do we stand for, and very often those have led to kind of banal, statements, mission statements that feel kind of like empty calories. And I feel like we're at this moment where companies are really having to think much harder about those things, and to come out with things that feel more meaningful rather than just a kind of empty exercise. All of which I think is good.
Well, your point's well taken. I think the business roundtables and all the signatories on that, I don't think people feel that there's enough behind that that's happening. So there has been pressure. There's been a lot of discussion about that. But this topic is only going to get bigger, Adam, as you and I both know. And I think that companies are going to have to get their arms around it, and we'll just have to wait and see where the trends and conversations go, and know that in most cases the boards are very mindful of all the facets that make their business successful.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us. And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.